We know him as Maharshi Dayananda Saraswati, but before he took that title, he was Mool Shankar Tiwari, born into an orthodox Brahmin family in Gujarat. He operated simultaneously in two distinct modes, as a rigorous 19th-century philosopher dissecting ancient texts, and as the founder of the Arya Samaj, a relentless reformist organization. In 1876, he formulated the first explicit political call for Swaraj, India for Indians, building his case entirely on the foundation of Vedic philosophy. Returning to scriptural literalism created a rigid framework for an anti-colonial movement, grounding radical nationalism in ancient axioms. His rejection of orthodoxy began with a specific empirical observation. During a rigorous Shivratri fast required by his Shaivite upbringing, a young Dayananda stayed awake and watched a mouse climb onto a Shiva idol to eat the temple offerings. This triggered an immediate logical deduction. If a deity cannot defend its own physical representation against a common rodent, it cannot logically possess the omnipotence required to maintain the universe. The subsequent deaths of his sister and his uncle from cholera forced him to confront the mechanics of life and death directly. In 1846, to avoid an arranged marriage that would tie him to a domestic life he had already rejected, he left home entirely. For the next 24 years, he lived as a wandering ascetic. He dedicated himself to the study of yoga and maintained a strict vegetarian diet, isolating himself to parse the texts he was studying. His methodology crystallized under the instruction of a blind guru named Virajananda Dandisha. Under Virajananda, Dayananda made a lifelong pledge to restore the uncorrupted authority of the original Vedas. He concluded that purging centuries of post-Vedic historical accretions and mythology was the mandatory first step to establishing a rationally defensible Hindu theology. Dayananda established a strict epistemological premise. Only the four original Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva, are true sources of Dharma. He argued they alone remained uncorrupted because of their precise preservation through Sanskrit prosody and specific chanting techniques. Looking at this diagram, you can see his sorting matrix in action. From the vast expanse of Hindu literature, he applied a strict filter, retaining the Vedas, along with the first 10 principal Upanishads and the 6 Vedangas. To interpret these retained texts, he endorsed only 2 linguistic tools, Panini's grammar and Patanjali's Mahabhasha. All later grammatical texts were discarded as dishonest or confusing. He also retained the 6 Darshana Shastras, including Kapila's Sankhya, but he reinterpreted them. Instead of viewing them as competing ideologies, he structured them as complementary angles illuminating the same universal truth. The texts that failed his filter were discarded completely. He explicitly rejected the 18 Puranas, the Iba Puranas, and all tantric texts, defining them as late, contradictory interpolations designed to justify idol worship. This required him to redefine key historical figures. He argued the title Vyasa, for instance, did not refer to a literal author who physically divided the Vedas, but was instead a descriptive term indicating a vast breadth of knowledge. This extreme textual reductionism converted Hinduism from a fluid, highly localized mythological tradition into a rigid axiomatic system with defined logical boundaries. With the textual foundation set, Dayananda constructed his ontology, known as Traitavada. This graph models the concept. Reality consists of 3 distinct, eternal, and parallel pillars: the Supreme Lord, the souls, and nature. Nature, or Prakriti, is the material cause of creation. It operates in endless cycles of equilibrium, transitioning between periods of cosmic expansion and dissolution, known as the day and night of Brahma. The souls, or Jivatmas, are formless, vast in number, and eternally distinct. They acquire physical bodies based on their past karma, cycling through lives to strive for ultimate self-realization. The Supreme Lord, whose proper name is Om, is the efficient cause of the universe. The Lord is characterized entirely by existence, supreme consciousness, and eternal bliss. To avoid contradictions, Dayananda redefined how to describe God's attributes. Saguna refers to the characteristics God actively possesses, like omnipotence. Nirguna refers to the characteristics God logically lacks, like physical birth or a material body. This framework sets up his specific definition of moksha, or liberation. He defined it as the turiya state, a condition where the soul remains bodiless and retains its individual identity, utilizing the Supreme Lord's power to experience absolute bliss. Crucially, he argued moksha must have a time limit. His logic was strict. Actions performed by a human over a finite earthly lifespan cannot mathematically yield infinite, unending results. Eventually, the soul must return to the world. This tripartite model placed the ultimate emphasis on individual agency. It provided a rational, internally consistent alternative to both the absolute non-dualism of Advaita Vedanta and the creation ex nihilo models of Abrahamic religions. Dayananda operationalized these axioms by founding the Arya Samaj, an organization built on 10 universal principles that demanded action for the benefit of mankind. Because souls are distinct and bound by their own karma, he argued that a birth-based caste system was scripturally invalid. He demanded a Varna system based entirely on education, merit, and profession. By the exact same logic, he aggressively opposed untouchability and advocated for equal educational rights for women, regardless of their background. He also integrated national economic and social reforms into his theology. He advocated for cow protection as a mechanism for agricultural prosperity and pushed for the adoption of Hindi to create linguistic integration across the subcontinent. He enforced these ideas through direct debate. In October 1869, he traveled to Varanasi and debated 27 Orthodox scholars simultaneously in front of an audience of thousands, dismantling their defenses of deity worship. He applied this same strict empiricism to science. He validated astronomy and mathematics as necessary disciplines, but condemned astrology as outright fraud. He argued that stars and planets are inanimate objects devoid of consciousness. They cannot override the universal law of karma. His social reforms functioned as theological imperatives, serving as the direct logical extensions of his newly established Vedic axioms. He compiled these arguments into his magnum opus, Satyarth Prakash, or the Light of Truth. This grid visualizes his approach. He built a critical framework and systematically applied it to every major competing faith, auditing them for violations of logic and natural law. Looking at the Matrix, his critique of Islam focused heavily on its doctrines of warfare. For Christianity, he targeted logical fallacies within the Bible. He argued that doctrines like the perpetual virginity of Mary were mathematically and biologically impossible, and that an omniscient God would never violate his own infallible natural laws. He critiqued Sikhism by challenging Guru Nanak's proficiency in Sanskrit, and he rejected the claims made by later followers that the gurus possessed miraculous, physics-defying powers. He classified Jainism as a fundamentally intolerant theology, documenting what he viewed as their textual hostility toward non-Jains. And he rejected Buddhism as an atheistic, anti-Vedic system, specifically dismantling their cosmological claim that the earth was uncreated. By drawing these harsh, unyielding theological boundaries against the rest of the world, Dayananda fortified a distinct, uncompromising modern Hindu identity, one capable of surviving colonial pressure. His refusal to soften his polemics made him an immediate target. He faced multiple assassination attempts across the subcontinent, ranging from poisonings to coordinated physical attacks on the banks of the Ganges. When attackers attempted to drown him, he survived using advanced pranayama breathing techniques. His conditioning allowed him to remain submerged, waiting out his assailants. In 1883, he accepted an invitation to the court of Maharaja Jaswant Singh II in Jodhpur. During his stay, Dayananda openly admonished the Maharaja for engaging in an unethical relationship with a dancing girl named Nanhi Jan, instructing him to strictly follow his dharma. Offended, Nanhi Jan orchestrated a lethal retaliation. On September 29th, she bribed Dayananda's personal cook, Jagannath, to mix finely crushed glass into the philosopher's nightly milk. Dayananda drank the milk and immediately suffered massive internal hemorrhaging. As he lay bedridden, a guilt-ridden Jagannath confessed to the crime. Dayananda forgave his assassin, handing him a bag of money to fund his escape before the Maharaja's guards could execute him. Despite medical transfers to Mount Abu and eventually Ajmer, the damage was irreversible. On October 30th, 1883, the morning of Diwali, he died chanting mantras. His ashes were later scattered at Rishi Udyan. The violent circumstances of his death proved that his strict adherence to Vedic principles was an absolute moral conviction he was willing to die for. His institutional framework immediately outlived him. The Paropkarni Sabha, which he founded in 1880, took over the printing of his texts, and the annual Tenkara Mela continued to gather thousands. Physical sites of his work were preserved, like the Navlaka Mahal in Udaipur, where he drafted the final edition of his magnum opus. The ideological framework he constructed served as a direct instruction manual for the leaders of the Indian independence movement. His writings influenced a massive roster of revolutionaries. Figures like Shyamji Krishna Varma, Madam Kama, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Vinayak Damodar Savarkar all utilized his concepts of self-reliance and national pride. Even Bhagat Singh had a direct institutional connection, receiving his primary education at a Dayananda Anglo-Vedic school in Lahore, completely immersed in the philosopher's reformist curriculum. This influence was sustained by the sheer volume of his scholarly output. He authored over 60 distinct works, ranging from formal debate transcripts to the 16-volume Vedang Prakash, and his massive commentaries on the original Vedas. He realized that political independence required intellectual independence first. By relentlessly systematizing ancient epistemology, he engineered the philosophical engine that powered modern India's liberation.